Hello. Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? I've been warned that the acoustics can be a little funky. Okay. It's so fantastic to be here and see so many familiar faces. Thanks so much to Andreas, as always, for his leadership of ICN, and to President Fernandez and her colleagues at the CNMC for hosting this year's conference. Over the last decade, we've heard mounting concerns about inadequate competition across key markets in the U.S. economy. Evidence suggests that decades of mergers have been a key driver of weakened competition and reduced economic dynamism. As President Biden noted in his executive order on promoting competition, industry consolidation has denied Americans the benefit of an open economy with workers, farmers, small businesses, and consumers paying the price. Evidence suggests that many Americans historically have lost out with diminished opportunity, higher prices, lower wages, and lagging innovation. A lack of competition also appears to have left segments of our economy more brittle, as consolidated supply and reduced investment in capacity can render us less resilient in the face of market disruptions. In response to these trends, agencies in the U.S. government are taking action to spur fair competition across the U.S. economy. The FTC and DOJ's proposed revisions of the merger guidelines are a core part of that effort. Informed by over 5,000 public comments and several listening sessions with market participants across the country, the updates are designed to reflect the realities of how businesses grow and compete in today's economy. Three principal goals drove our proposed revisions. First, we sought to ensure that the guidelines reflect modern market realities. Second, we wanted to ensure that the guidelines faithfully reflect the full scope of the laws that Congress passed and prevailing legal precedent. And third, we sought to ensure that the guidelines provide a clear and administrable framework that courts and market participants can easily apply. Today, I'm going to discuss some of the key changes that we've proposed and how recent FTC enforcement efforts demonstrate some of these updated frameworks in action. The guidelines address enforcement blind spots and lay out frameworks for policing mergers in a range of different contexts, including labor, platforms, serial acquisitions, and partial acquisitions. I'll discuss each of these in turn. First, the revised guidelines outline how enforcers will assess whether transactions may lessen competition in labor markets. Although antitrust law from its founding has been concerned about the effects of monopoly power on workers, merger analysis in recent decades has often overlooked this dimension. At the same time, empirical research shows that concentration has increased across labor markets with a meaningful decline in worker wages. Informed by this research, as well as widespread input from the public, the proposed guidelines identify how U.S. agencies will assess whether a merger may lessen competition for labor, including, for example, by looking at the merging firm's power to cut or freeze wages, slash benefits, and degrade working conditions. Along these lines, last year when we challenged a merger between the two largest healthcare providers in the state of Rhode Island, my colleague Commissioner Slaughter and I contended that the proposed merger would also lessen competition in a relevant market for healthcare professionals, not only for patients. We will continue to do this type of labor analysis in future merger cases. Second, as more individuals and businesses depend on platforms to access key services, it is more important than ever to prevent mergers that allow incumbent gatekeepers to shield themselves from competition. This is why the proposed guidelines specifically lay out how enforcers will assess acquisitions involving platforms, drawing on recent years of experience and learning. For example, the guidelines note that we will consider not only competition between current players offering similar services, but also competition from firms selling on the platform, and firms whose offerings could displace an existing platform. Recognizing the special characteristics of digital markets, the guidelines also lay out some of the precise ways that platform acquisitions can undermine competition. For example, an incumbent player may buy up a major platform participant in order to deprive rivals of network effects and economies of scale, or it may buy up a player that was facilitating multi-homing across platforms. Either of these acquisition strategies can unlawfully lessen competition. We recently applied some of this thinking in the FTC's lawsuit to block IQVIA, the world's largest healthcare data provider, from acquiring Propel Media. Our complaint states that the deal would eliminate not just head-to-head competition between the firms, but that it would also enable IQVIA to degrade rivals' access to key data sets or to deprive them of that access altogether. Third, the proposed guidelines address serial acquisitions. Across sectors in the US, firms have deployed roll-up strategies to incrementally consolidate markets. While each individual transaction may not rise to the level of a law violation, the roll-up scheme in the aggregate can still unlawfully lessen competition. The proposed guidelines clarify that enforcers can assess an overall pattern of serial acquisitions or examine it as part of an industry trend rather than just looking at each deal in a silo. Consistent with those principles, in September, the FTC filed a lawsuit challenging a scheme by U.S. anesthesia partners and private equity firm Welsh Carson to roll up anesthesiology practices across the state of Texas. The complaint lays out how these entities systematically pursued a series of smaller acquisitions to consolidate the market. In the aggregate, these deals allowed the firms to hike prices, resulting in Texas patients and businesses paying tens of millions of dollars more than they would have absent this scheme. Evidence suggests that firms may have deployed these types of roll-up strategies across a range of markets, including veterinary practices and nursing homes. Through both bringing cases and updating our policy, the FTC is moving to address these types of stealth consolidation schemes and limit our blind spots. Fourth, the proposed guidelines lay out a framework for assessing competitive harms when an acquisition involves partial control or common ownership. Acquisitions of partial ownership or other minority interests may give the investor rights in the target firm, such as rights to appoint board members, observe board meetings, veto the firm's ability to raise capital, or impact operational decisions or access to competitively sensitive information. For the first time in nearly 40 years, the FTC recently took action against these types of unlawful interlocking directorates by blocking EQT, the nation's largest natural gas producer, from acquiring certain natural gas assets from private equity firm Quantum Energy Partners. Specifically, Quantum's anticipated position as one of EQT's largest shareholders and EQT's obligation to appoint a Quantum designee to the EQT board would have allowed the firms to exchange competitively sensitive information and to influence each other's strategic decisions in improper ways. Fundamentally, the draft guidelines take a practical and empirical approach to gauging competition and emphasize that there is no one-size-fits-all tool or method that can be applied across all contexts. Overall, we are hearing that our approach to merger enforcement is promoting greater deterrence. Prominent bankers and deal lawyers have stated that the FTC and DOJ's current approach is prompting firms to assess antitrust risk on the front end of merger discussions rather than later on. Preventing illegal deals from being proposed in the first instance is critical for promoting the rule of law. When finalized, the revised merger guidelines will provide even greater notice and clarity to businesses and other market participants, and in turn, further promote deterrence and competition. Our revisions also seek to reinvigorate the full scope of the laws that Congress passed to protect Americans from mergers that may lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. The Clayton Act seeks to preserve future competition and halt concentration in its incipiency, as courts have long recognized. The proposed guidelines accordingly lay out some ways that a merger may further spur consolidation or undermine future competition. For example, proposed Guideline 4 on potential entry focuses on preserving the possibility of entry in concentrated markets. This type of entry can boost competition, and a merger neutralizing or preventing that entry can violate the law. Proposed Guideline 7 focuses on acquisitions involving dominant firms and lays out how enforcers will assess the risk of entrenching a dominant position. And proposed Guideline 8 addresses markets that are trending towards concentration. The proposed guidelines also revise the thresholds for the structural presumption to more closely conform to the law and restore traditional figures. In the United States, courts have ruled that it is presumptively illegal for a merger to significantly increase concentration in an already highly concentrated market. While the 2010 guidelines raised this threshold, our proposed guidelines reset the standard to the one used by courts in past guidelines for decades. As we set out to update our guidelines, we had the benefit of learning from many of you who have recently or are in the process of revising your merger guidelines to address modern market realities, particularly in digital markets. We also observed the broader scope of merger review applied in many international jurisdictions, which highlighted the importance of moving past stale theories and models. It's essential that we widen the aperture of our merger analysis to match the realities of how firms in the modern economy can use deals to stifle competition. Our international engagement has been a critical part of that effort. We are so grateful for the feedback that we've received from many in the international enforcement community throughout this process, and we are confident that the forthcoming final guidelines will be even stronger and more effective as a result. As enforcers, we have the obligation to adapt to new learning while staying faithful to the law and the precedent on the books. The U.S. agency's proposed merger guidelines seek to do just that. Thank you again to ICN for continuing to set the gold standard in antitrust policy and enforcement, and for being such an important nexus for shared learning. Thanks so much.